RT, stop socializing. Get over here. I'm good. I've been eating my Wheaties. I can fit.
Is the croissant hamotzi or just mezuzah?
Hamotzi.
Yeah, croissant.
Yeah, because it's turned into a sandwich as a kovea su'uda. Dov, are we up and running? We are. How about that? Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Today's topic is the age of the universe. And we'll be dealing with that, but more broadly, I want to discuss the clashes between Torah and science in general, and certainly the age of the universe is an example of that, and it'll be a very beautiful example also in terms of how Torah observant, Torah believing Jews approach this. Something I'd like to point out is that when I was in high school, back in the 1800s, that's what it feels like, but actually there was a survey in 1959 of scientists that was done by Scientific American, and 2/3 of the scientists ascribed to the constant state of the universe theory that Aristotle and Plato speak about, and that is that the world, the universe has always existed. Has always existed. It was in the 1960s when they started to realize, one second, this is not a static but an ever-expanding universe. And at this point, the entire, I would say, it's not every single one, but basically the entire scientific world understands that there was a Big Bang. Now, this is an incredibly cataclysmic shift. In other words, the world went from looking at the first word of the Torah, Bereshit, in the beginning, as being this biblical fantasy, that this biblical fable about there being a creation. And then, in a matter of a few short years, the entire scientific world agrees. Bereshit. Yes. They haven't yet gotten to the next two words, bara Elokim, God created. But the entire scientific world agrees, yes, that first word of the Bible, of the Torah, is not a fable, it's not a folly, it's not an old wives' tale, but that scientifically is exactly what happened. There was Bereshit, there was a beginning. And fascinatingly enough, Ramban, one of the classic commentators, I believe 10th century, 12th century, 11th century, I'm not sure exactly, right? He's one of the commentators that's found in the Chumash, speaks about this speck from which didn't really have any form to it. We call it energy. This speck from which everything then unfolded, and time begins with matter, is what Ramban says. Only once there is physicality is there a measurement of time. So, on the sheet that we have over here, if there is an apparent clash between science and Torah, there are three basic approaches to deal with this. Number one, maybe we have misunderstood the science. That was clearly the case in terms of a static universe or a Big Bang. That we misunderstood the science. Science is taking the evidence in front of us and working back. Torah is looking at the blueprint as we're understanding that God has given us and understanding what unfolded. So if you are reading the blueprint correctly, and your evidence is being scrutinized, and the conclusions that you're drawing are correct, then they will meet, as we find by Bereshit and the Big Bang.
So one sees evidence backwards and one sees evidence forward?
One sees evidence in front of us, and from that concludes what was. And the Torah is telling us what unfolded. Right? It's coming from the beginning. Right? Another classic example of this. It's actually a mind-blowing example. When it comes to the month, the length of the lunar month. So we have a teaching already found in the Gemara, in the Talmud, of how long exactly is, how many days, how many hours, how many chalakim, which are parts of a minute. And it's 29 point, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. NASA in the 1970s, with, I don't know if it was Hubble or with whatever telescope they had, they came out with the length of the lunar month. And it was within 3,000ths of what we had all along. Right? Now, it's either working backwards, science is able to understand, or our divine knowledge that was imparted to us through the Torah, with which we go forward. When the scientist was confronted and said, the Jews have had that for thousands of years, his response was, lucky guess. Okay, with lucky guesses like that, we'd all be playing the Powerball, right? And we'd not have to do any fundraising drives for the shul or for any Jewish institution, if that was our lucky guesses. Okay, so maybe, number one, maybe we have misunderstood the science. We must never regard science as an absolute against which Torah must be made to fit. Much, although probably not all 20th century science, will be overturned by the end of the 21st century. Right? That's something that we see, that we're constantly, if not overturning, but certainly refining and redefining. I like to tell this story that my father, Shalom, when I was living in Israel, bought for me a book, which was a compilation of Reader's Digest articles. I am Jane's uterus. I am Joe's kidney. And it was a whole series of articles back when I was a teenager that I enjoyed reading, that Reader's Digest was putting out monthly. And it was the different organs of the body speaking and telling their story. So it was compiled into a book. My father got it for me. He knew that I had enjoyed that series. But in book form, it became very, very funny. So all of a sudden, you're reading one after another. Right? And in one article, the author writes, tongue-in-cheek, scientists used to think that I was a useless relic of evolution. Now they understand that I control the hormonal flow and balance of the body, and without me, there won't be dwarfs, giants, etc., as one example. And the very next article, they write, this is nothing but a useless relic of evolution. And when you read it one after another, you wonder to yourself, the same way that you have your tongue in cheek about what science used to think, right? Don't you realize that chances are 50 years from now, they'll be tongue in cheek about what you think. So science is not an absolute against which Torah must be made to fit. Number two, maybe we have misunderstood the Torah. Assume the Torah is much more sophisticated than you think. And we'll see a fascinating, in a moment, we'll see from Rambam in his Moreh Nevuchim, his Guide to the Perplexed, an incredible statement that he makes. You might have misunderstood the Torah. That's what I said before. If we're taking the evidence and working back correctly, and we're reading the blueprint correctly, then we're going to meet. But if we're erring in either one of those, our reading, our understanding of the blueprint of the Torah, or our deciphering of the evidence in front of us and the conclusions we're drawing are faulty, then it's not going to happen. 3, maybe they are both correct, but are looking at different questions. Science is how, Torah is why. They are working on different levels of reality.
Right.
And that's the classic example is after the flood, what are we told? There will never be a flood again. And what is the sign of that?
Oh, the rainbow.
The rainbow. What do you mean? The rainbow is simply a matter of condensation and the sun's rays breaking the condensation breaking the rays of the sun down into the different colors of the prism. Yeah, that is how. Torah is why. Right? Yes, that is the means through which a rainbow forms. Exactly what type of rainbow is this referring to? That's a whole different issue. But that's a classic example of the how and the why. Okay. The Rambam, Maimonides, entirely rejects Kadmut Ha'olam. Kadmut Ha'olam is the world always having existed. And writes at length in Moreh Nevuchim 225 disproving it. Okay? The Rambam is 11th century. However, he also writes, and I remember when I'm learning this with the Chavrusa, with David Room, when we came across this, it was like, wow. The Rambam wrote, if, however, we accepted the eternity of the universe in accordance with Plato, meaning if we would find that that is the case, we would not be in opposition to the fundamental principles of our religion. The scripture might have been explained accordingly, and many expressions might have been found in the Bible and in other writings which would confirm and support this theory. But there is no necessity for this expedient as long as the theory has not been proved, and in fact the theory has been disproven. But the Rambam is saying that our understanding of Torah might not be fully accurate. Obviously, we're going to go with what we have. We're not going to say, oh, so then let's drop the whole thing because we don't know if it's accurate. Obviously, we're going to go with our understanding and the tradition and the teaching that we've had. But there might be other understandings, as we will see. Okay. The Torah states that Adam HaRishon was created 57, well, this article was a little while ago, right? 71 years ago, right? We'll say 79 years ago. And the creation of the rest of the universe took 6 days before that. Thus, the age of the universe is those thousands of years plus 6 days. Scientists are unanimous that the universe is much older than that. Estimates vary from between 10 and 20 billion years. This date is not arrived at through a theoretical construct, but by observable evidence from a variety of sources which all validate this estimate. Right? It's not that they took a lucky guess. There is much that this is based upon. This evidence includes, 1, the observable existence of galaxies billions of light years away. Assuming the constancy of the speed of light, these galaxies existed billions of years ago. Right? This is not talking about them traveling. This is talking about if we see the light. If we see the light of these galaxies, well, and this is the distance, how long did it take for that to reach us? Based on its distance, divide the distance by the speed of light, it took billions of years for us to see this. So therefore that light was emitted. When we look up at the sky and we see the stars, those stars might not be there anymore. But those stars emitted light. And it took that much time for that light to reach us. It took days, weeks, years, hundreds of years for the light of those stars to reach us. they might have imploded 50 million years ago. But we're going to continue seeing it until a certain point where we won't. So number one is, if we see galaxies billions of light years away, they existed billions of years ago because that's when they emitted the light that we see. Number two, radioactive dating of elements found in rocks. When applied to rocks on the surface of the earth, the oldest rocks are about 3.8 billion years old. When applied to meteorites, the oldest are 4.56. This is understood to be the age of the solar system. Number three, measuring the luminosity of old star clusters gives ages of around 12 billion years. Four, on a more theoretical basis, the observable expansion of the universe, seen by redshift in the more distant stars, can be extrapolated using the Hubble constant to a point of the original Big Bang about 15 billion years ago. Different eras evident from rock strata which show that different types of species existed at different times. Fossils of aquatic creatures in today's mountain ranges. Different dinosaurs at different times. So that's the evidence that is very powerful. Yes?
Except that we're using human frames of reference. In God's eyes, a day is a billion years.
Okay.
And it could be in God's eyes, that's how long it took.
Okay. So we will deal with that and we will refine that somewhat. Yes, Ida, but that is definitely one of the approaches that we will work with.
Yeah.
Right? But with Einstein and Schroeder, it actually becomes a lot sharper. Okay? Approach number one. The world was made looking old. Now, that sounds ridiculous at first, but 1 second. Was Adam a newborn baby?
No.
Were the animals newborn babies?
No.
Was the garden a newly planted garden?
No.
The world was created in a mature state. Okay? This accepts the scientific analysis, but claims that Hashem made the world to look in an adult state, whereas in fact it is only the 5779 years old. Okay, and this is from the Lubavitcher Rabbi. The argument from the discovery of fossils is by no means conclusive evidence of the great antiquity of the earth, for the following reasons. In view of the unknown conditions which existed in prehistoric times, conditions of atmospheric pressures, temperatures, radioactivity, unknown catalyzers, etc., as already mentioned, conditions that is, which could have caused reactions and changes of an entirely different nature and tempo from those known under the present daily orderly processes of nature, one cannot exclude the possibility that dinosaurs existed 5,722 years ago and became fossilized under terrific natural cataclysms in the course of a few years rather than millions of years, since we have no conceivable measurements or criteria of calculations under those unknown conditions. Even assuming the period of time, B, which the Torah allows for the age of the world, is definitely too short for fossilization, although I don't see how this can be so categorical, we can still readily accept the possibility that God created ready fossils, bones, or skeletons. Right? If I were to transplant a tree, right? Theoretically, right? We transplant a tree from Earth, and we plant it on the moon. Okay? And then no one visits the moon for a long time. And then scientists return to the moon. But they didn't know that, the Israeli lander, right, was planting a tree, right, when it's going to land on the moon. They were not aware of that. And then decades later, right, they land and they find that tree. And they start to examine that tree and they see how many rings the tree has. And they say, wow, this tree has been on the moon for 1,500 years. Look at the rings of this tree. Right? But it was planted with 1,450 rings. That's how many rings it had when they planted it there. So what was the state of all of these, though it really wouldn't work, this really would not answer the stars. But examining things on earth, if it was created in a mature state, then we're going to see all of this. Yes, Steve?
They planted, the Israelis planted an escrow tree.
Yeah, it was the JNF. It was the JNF, yes. Okay. So we can readily say the possibility that God created ready fossils, bones or skeletons. Why? For reasons best known to him. Just as he could create ready living organisms, a complete man, and such ready products as oil, coil, or diamonds, without any evolutionary process. As for the question, if it be true as above, why did God have to create fossils in the first place? The answer is simple. We cannot know the reason why God chose this manner of creation in preference to another. And whatever theory of creation is accepted, the question will always remain unanswered. The question, why create a fossil, is no more valid than the question, why create an atom? So such a question cannot serve as a sound argument, much less a logical basis for the evolutionary theory. So what the Lubavitcher Rebbe is saying, is that atmospheric pressures and the volatility and the change of who knows what might, we're assuming static according to today's pressures. According to today's pressures, that's what we are assuming. But these things, who knows, they're always the same. Okay? So that is one approach. Some other sources on that. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, this is a little 4 there. Rabbi ben Levi, Kol Maaseh Bereshit B'Kol Matan Nivra'u. The Gemara says all the acts of creation, B'Kol Matan, Kol is standing up, in their full stature, they were created. Man, the animals, the trees, vegetation, and so too the earth. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam Afar min Adama. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon Omer Ofer Olam al Meleato Nivra. The world was created al Meleato, in its full manner. Al Bar Shimon Av Chava. So too Chava was created al Meleata, as an adult. Adam and Chava K'nei Esrim Shana Nivru. They were like 20-year-olds when they were created. Just a thought that I just had now. Well, why would God create the world with fossils? To give us oil. To give us oil. Right? It's from that decomposition that we have the oil reserves. Who knows? Approach number 1 is everything that science says is 100% accurate. Except they are assuming, right, that that the world began on day 1 of 15 billion years ago. But if the world was created as a world that was 14 billion and change, so from that point on, and the stars were at that point, etc., etc., so from that point on, so we've had our 5,000 and change years. Approach number 2, and this is fascinating. The days of creation ran at a different speed. Actually, let's go to number 3 first, and then we'll double back to this one, because number 2 is going to take a little more time of ours. The last page, 4th side. Approach number 3, there were worlds prior to our creation. When we say worlds, we mean iterations of life on this world prior to our creation. This approach is the dot of Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. It brings from classical sources to show that the present world may be that 5,770 change years old, but there were billions of years of prior worlds before ours. That we have in the Medrash. Amr Yosef Bar Simon Yehi Erev Ein Ktiv Kan. It doesn't say Yehi Erev. It was night. Vayihi Erev. And it became night. Implying that there were other nights before this one that we are discussing. Mikan Shayaseder Zmanim Kodel Kain. There were orders of time prior to this. God created worlds, meaning iterations on this planet of ours, umacharivan, and destroyed them. Ad shebara et elu, until these were created. Amar dein hanein li yitzhan lo hanein li. These are good, these are not going to work. Amar Pinchas Tami Rav Vayar Lakim et kol asher asa v'hinei tov ma'od. That's how he understands, and God saw all that had been done, and behold, it was very good. Another source I don't have over here is from the Or HaChaim, who speaks about, right, Bereshit, in the beginning, God, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim et haaretz. In the beginning, let's go with God created heavens and earth. Right? Va'aretz haita tovavo, and the land was tova, v'choshech al pnei ha'tohom, v'ruach Elokim merachet al pnei hamayim. Where did water come from? So he understands it. In the beginning, God created, and then there were many iterations, and we're picking up with our present iteration. That there was this choshech, there was this darkness over the waters, and that begins our present iteration of God's creation. And Vayikra, and this also found in Ramban and Rabbeinu Bachya, there were cycles of creation. Sheva Shabbatot Shanin Hein Sheva Shmitot. 7 years makes for, or 7 Shemitah cycles, right? These are the 7 Shemitahs. 7 years makes a Shemitah cycle. Remez, this alludes, Ki Yechadesh Kodesh Baruch Olamo, Shiva Pamim. There'll be 7 different renewals of this world. B'chol Shemitah Pamachat. Each one will advance, become better and better, and a greater hashba'at bracha, a greater flow of blessing from the previous one. Right? And then the souls will return. Lastly, pre-creation time from Eov is on a different scale entirely, right? The pasuk says in Eov, and the ayat is what you had said, Hakimei enosh yamecha. Are your, meaning God, capital Y, uppercase Y, are your days like the days of mankind? Im shenotecha kamo kimei gaver. Are your years like the years of a person? So there were many, many creations beforehand. Fascinatingly, Tiferet Yisroel is one of the classic commentators on the Mishnah, and he's printed in the classic Yachin Boaz, the classic set of Mishnayot. He's printed there, and this is in the 19th century when they discovered these fossils. And you think that a believing person would be shaken, right? This Torah believing great rabbi scholar was exuberant when they found these fossils. He writes, according to where I see it, those people who were there in a previous iteration of this world, pre-Adamite, those who inhabited the world prior to mankind as we know it. These are the 974 generations that are mentioned in the Talmud in Shabbos, the Talmud in Chagiga, that existed before our world. Right? So he says we have all these medrashim which speaks about worlds having been created and destroyed. And now mankind has tunneled down and has found evidence of these teachings. He was exuberant. All right, Kaplan writes, Adam was merely the first human being created in the latest cycle. According to these opinions, it would seem that man already had the physical mental capacities that we possess as early as 974 generations before Adam, or some 25,000 years ago, Neanderthal. But Adam was unique in his spiritual component, in that spiritual aspect. So, on one hand, we have God created a mature world, right? So, you're going to if someone's making furniture, he might want to age it to make it appear as if, right, this is older than it is, as a certain quality. Okay? On the other hand, approach number 3, the Midrashim speak about worlds prior to our worlds. And certainly, the dinosaur world was a very different world than our world. Approach number 2. So let's come back to where we were, which is the back of the first page. The 6 days of creation ran at a different speed. 6 days are real days, and are 15 billion years at the same time. It sounds magical, but it's a very fine Jew who shared this with us, Mr. Einstein. Right? He wasn't coming to explain this, but with his theory of relativity, that gives us a whole different understanding. This approach is adopted by Rabbi Shimon Schwab, 20th century Germany, America, and the Leshem, Rabbi Yosef's grandfather, late 19th century, early 20th century Jerusalem. It proposes that before the creation of man on day 6, the world did not run at the same pace. In fact, although the 6 days of creation were indeed 6 24-hour periods, the world ran at such a speed as would take billions of years by our current reckoning. As such, the world is just 5771 years, 9 years old, but squeezed a lot into the first 6 days. What does that mean? Building on the analysis of Rabbi Schwab, Dr. Gerald Schroeder, who was a religious MIT physicist, has produced a theory based on the theory of relativity, that the passage of time will differ depending on velocity and gravity. That's not Schroeder. That's physics. Time is based upon velocity and gravity, and also will soon see a stretching. So too, each day of creation was a 24-hour day from the perspective of the Creator of the expanding universe at that time. And then I quoted from an article that if you want to, you could just Google Gerald Schroeder, Age of Universe, and you'll see this whole article that I took a lot from in its entirety. Day 1, and not a first day, seeing time from beginning, right? There's an anomaly in the way the Torah lists the days of creation. The second, day 2 is not day 2. It's the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. But day 1 is not the first day. It's day 1, and then not day 2. It's day 1, and then the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. The fact the Bible tells us there is evening and morning, day 1, teaches us that from a biblical perspective, we are from near the beginning looking forward. Meaning, if we were at Sinai looking back, what would we call day 1? The first day. Why is it the first day? Because there was already a second, third, fourth, fifth, and thousands that followed. But if we're at the point of day 1, can we call that the first day? There is no second to call that the first. If I'm running a race and I win, if I'm running against someone else, you could say Ciner came in first. If I'm not racing anyone, I didn't come in first. I came in, but not first. There's no second, there's no first. So we're calling day 1, we're not looking back, We're looking forward. If there is no second, there is no first. It is day one. We look back in time and say the universe is 15 billion years old. But as every scientist knows, when we say the universe is 15 billion years old, there's another half of the sentence that we rarely bother to say. The universe is 15 billion years old as seen from the time, space, coordinates of Earth. The key is that the Torah looks forward in time from very different time-space coordinates. When the universe was small. Since then, the universe has expanded. Space stretches. And we're constantly stretching. Right?
Entropy.
Okay?
Expanding.
Yeah, constantly expanding. Right? I mean, I don't know how to wrap my head around that. What is beyond the perimeter of where the Earth is now? I don't know.
Milky Way.
Sorry?
The Milky Way.
No, that's in our universe. If the universe is expanding,
Okay.
that's all in our universe. What is beyond the universe that we're expanding into?
Empty space.
Okay?
Hashem?
Space stretches, and the stretching of space totally changes the perception of time. Okay, this is a fantastic example. Imagine going back billions of years, beginning of time. Pretend way back at the beginning, when time grabs hold, which is when there's matter, there is an intelligent community. Imagine they have a laser, and they're going to shoot out a blast of light every second. Every second, a pulse. A pulse. Pulse. Every second. On each pulse of light, the following formation is printed. I'm sending you a pulse every second. Billions of years later, way far down the timeline, we here on Earth have a satellite dish, and we receive that pulse of light. On that pulse of light, we read, I'm sending you a pulse every second. Light travels 186,000 miles a second. So at the beginning, the two light pulses are separated by a second of travel, which is travel of light of 186,000 miles. Now they travel through space for billions of years until they reach the Earth. But wait a minute. Is the universe static? No, the universe is expanding. So they started off being a second apart. But as the universe expands, what happens? The space between them keeps growing. So as these pulses travel through space for billions of years, space is stretching. What's happening to these pulses? The space between them is stretching out. So the pulses get further and further apart. Billions of years later, when the first pulse arrives, we read on it, I'm sending you a pulse every second. A message from outer space. You call your friends, wait for the next pulse to arrive. Does it arrive a second later? No. A year later? Maybe not. Maybe billions of years later. Because the amount of time this pulse of light has traveled through space will determine the amount of space stretching that has occurred. So how much space and then how much time there will be between the arrival of the pulses? That is standard cosmology. Today we look back in time and we see approximately 15 billion years of history. Looking forward from when the universe is very small, billions of times smaller, the Torah says 6 days. Again, if we're measuring from where we're sending out the pulse, every second, every second, every second, right? So 60 pulses is a minute. But 60 pulses by us is stretching out over years, thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years. If we're measuring it over here, 60 pulses, 1 minute. 6 days. We're measuring it on Earth, 60 pulses, years and years and years and years and years.
So the measurements will be determined by the time that exists within each of these periods.
Correct.
Correct.
Time is relative.
Right.
Time is relative to
Yes.
speed, velocity, and the stretching of the universe.
So we can't just have one accurate measurement. The measurement is in a state of change.
Correct.
Is
No,
that correct?
let's say I'm sending you a package, right? I got a slingshot, and I'm shooting a tennis ball at you every second, right? So in 60 seconds, I've shot 60 tennis balls, right? So we're measuring the tennis balls we're measuring time by tennis balls, right? But let's say I'm in a Lamborghini and I'm going 200 miles an hour away from you. Every second I'm sending you a tennis ball, right? But the amount of time between each ball arriving at you is stretching out, right? So if we're measuring tennis balls, right, so your minute of 60 tennis balls is going to be hours and hours. Today we look back in time and see approximately 50 billion years of history. Looking forward from when the universe was very small, billions of times smaller, the Torah says 6 days. In truth, both may be correct. What's exciting about the last few years in cosmology is we now have quantified the data to know the relationship of the view of time from the beginning of stable matter, the threshold energy protons and neutrons, over my head, their nucleosynthesis, relative to the view of time today. It is not science fiction any longer. A dozen physics textbooks all bring the same number. The general relation between nucleosynthesis, the time near the beginning at the threshold energy of proton and neutron when matter formed, and time today is a million. 1 with 12 zeros. So when a view from the beginning we look forward saying, I'm sending you a pulse every second, would we see a pulse every second? No, we see it every million seconds. Because that's the stretching effect of the expansion of the universe. The Talmud tells us the soul of Adam was created at 5.5 days after the beginning of the 6 days. It was on the middle of the 6th day, right? 5.5 days in other words. That is a half day before the termination of the 6th day. At that moment, the cosmic calendar ceases and an earth-based calendar starts. With Adam, we start to measure time where? Right here, in Irvine. How do we see those days stretched? By a million. 5.5 days times a million gives us 5.5 million days. Dividing that by 365 days in a year, that comes out to be 15 billion years. NASA gives a value of about 14 billion years. Concerning the many approximations and that Bible works with only 6 periods of time, the agreement within a few percent is extraordinary. The universe is billions of years old from one perspective, and a mere 6 days old from another. And both are correct.
Yeah.
The 5.5 days of Genesis are not of equal duration. Each time the universe doubles in size, the perception of time halves as we project that time back toward the beginning of the universe. It's interesting. The rate is doubling, that is, the fractional rate of change is very rapid at the beginning and decreases with time simply because the universe gets larger and larger. Right? So if in the first minute I've traveled 100 miles, right? And in the second minute I travel 100 miles, so I've doubled. The next minute I travel 100 miles. That's no longer double, that's half of my distance. Now 300 miles, I go another 100 miles, that's a third. I go another 100 miles, that's a quarter. That's a fifth, right? It keeps becoming less of a percentage of the whole. It takes longer and longer for the overall size to double. because as the earliest of the 6 days have most of the 15 billion years sequestered with them, for the duration of each day and the detail of how it matches, right, see the Science of God, one of his books. But I have on the next page. Here's also a fantastic example. This is similar to drawing a 1-inch line on a deflated balloon. When the balloon is gradually inflated, the same line may be first 5, then 10, then 20 centimeters long. Okay? This universe is expanding. That same one line, so to speak, gets bigger. Using the scientific calculation for the expansion of the universe and gravitational forces, Dr. Schroeder comes to the following. Day 1 is 24 hours, was 8 billion years, based on the math we saw before. Day 2, 4. Day 3, 2. Day 4, 1. Day 5, a half. Day 6.25, equaling 15.75 billion years. So this third approach, the second approach, but the third one that we went through, is a fascinating approach based on the relativity of time. That time is based upon the speed, based upon the gravitational pull. I've heard about the twin paradox. Two identical twins. One is on a